Good morning to all of you in what is the last bit of text we do. We are finishing today Kant's text on religion within the limits of reason alone. And with that, we will be done for the semester, and I will ask you to, as you review, to see if you have questions, and maybe we'll answer them this Friday, and if not, next week. So in this same text, we get now to the root of evil, if you like, the radical evil in human nature. So please go with me to page 129. Kant says in the second paragraph there, more recent, though far less widespread, is the opposite heroic opinion, which has gained standing only among philosophers, and in our days especially among the pedagogues, that the world steadfastly, though hardly noticeably, steadfastly it means surely, forges ahead in the very opposite direction, namely from bad to better. That at least there is in the human being the predisposition to move in this direction. But surely if this issue is moral good or evil, not just growth in civilization, they have not drawn this view from experience, for the history of all times attests far too powerfully against it. All right. And we may presume that it is rather just an optimistic presupposition on the part of the moralists, from Seneca to Rousseau, intended to encourage the indefatigable cultivation of that seed of goodness that perhaps lies in us, if one could only count on any such natural foundation of goodness in the humankind. Yet this is also to be said, since we must assume that the human being is sound of body by nature, that is to say, in the way he is usually born, there is no cause not to assume that he is equally sound and good of soul by nature as well. Nature itself would then be promoting the cultivation in us of this ethical predisposition toward goodness. And don't worry about the Latin here from Seneca. Seneca says, Sana bilibus egrotamus malis, nosque in rectum genitos natura si sanari velimus adiuvat. We are sick with curable diseases, and if we wish to be cured, nature comes to our aid, for we are born to health. Okay. So Kant is talking here about some thoughts around at the time in the Enlightenment. There was this notion, there are two things that were going around. One thing is seen in the reign of reason. In other words, the Enlightenment saw history in this way, which is the following. It said, with the Enlightenment, we are bringing knowledge more and more to the people. Knowledge is becoming more public. People are becoming more critical, they're becoming independent, they are relying on their reason instead of on traditions, they are relying on their reason instead of prejudice, instead of tradition, instead of superstition, and so on. And as time progresses, as people more and more rely on their reason, the world will get better. So we are moving from worse to better thanks to our enlightened reasons and thanks to the fact that reason is enlightening our thought. And there was also another movement that was also optimistic in that sense, and it's represented by Rousseau, whom Kant mentions also. Rousseau, as you know, talks about human nature as good. For Rousseau, when we were in the state of nature, it means before civilization and so on, we were good. We were good. And so man is born good according to Rousseau. This is also in the discourse on inequality, but also in the social contract. Man is born good, society corrupts him, right? So because we are born good, it means we are naturally good. We are made good naturally. So it is possible, we keep the state of nature in us, of course. It's not a chronological thing only. State of nature is something that we have because we have this good in us, this radical good, in fact, for Rousseau. We can somehow, with a good education, bring this good out. So for Rousseau, we had two principles: the principle of preservation, which he calls self-love, amour de soi, and we have another principle that tempers this one, so that we don't just love ourselves, we also feel for others. It's called the principle of pity, and it's basically that we have sympathy. It means we suffer with others. If you see someone suffering, you help them. All right, so this is, of course, why Rousseau says we are naturally good, we are not naturally evil. So there are these theories at the time in the Enlightenment in Kant. This double movement, one represented by the big thinkers of the Enlightenment, and the one by Rousseau, who's the anti-figure of the Enlightenment, but also believes that man is inherently good, is by nature good. Now, Kant is going to move toward also considering, we will see, evil. So let's continue here to read Kant. Next paragraph, page then 130 in your book. But since it will may be that we have erred in both these ways of reading experience, the question arises whether a middle ground may not at least be possible, namely, that a species, the human being, can neither be good, that as a species, the human being can neither be good nor evil, or at any rate that he can be the one just as much as the other, partly good, partly evil. We call a human being evil, however, not because he performs actions that are evil contrary to law, but because these are so constituted that they allow the inference of evil maxims in him. Now, through experience, we can indeed notice unlawful actions, and also notice, at least within ourselves, that these actions are consciously contrary to law. But we cannot observe maxims, we cannot do so unproblematically. We cannot observe maxims, we cannot do so unproblematically even within ourselves. Hence, the judgment that an agent is an evil human being cannot reliably be based on experience. In order then to call a human being evil, it must be possible to infer a priori from a number of consciously evil actions, or even from a single one, an underlying evil maxim, and from this, the presence in the subject of a common ground itself, a maxim, of all particular morally evil maxims. What is Kant saying here is simply that we cannot base evil on experience, right? Because evil comes, of course, from maxims that we have to ourselves. I remind you what a maxim is. A maxim is a rule of behavior. It's a rule of action. It's a rule of action. And this rule of action, of course, is under our thinking. And we have to use that maxim then to influence how we act in the world. So we can have a good maxim, for example, act in such a way that you treat, this is from Kant, humanity in yourselves and in others always as an end and never as a means, which means you should never use people to get what you want. You should respect, you should consider that the humanity in them is your purpose, and you have to preserve it. This is, of course, the foundation of the Declaration of Human Rights. But you can have an evil maxim. You can have something like treat the opposite of this. We can say in all your actions, treat others always as a means and not as an end. So this is a maxim that comes from you, that comes then a priori before, in the sense of before experience. And then you go and act and in the world and under the evil maxim. Okay, we continue. Count again, but lest, so that not, lest. But lest anyone be immediately scandalized, for fear that anyone would be immediately scandalized by the expression nature, which would stand in direct contradiction to the predicates morally good or morally evil, if taken to mean, as it usually does, the opposite of the ground of actions arising from freedom, let it be noted, okay, I underline here, nature of a human being, when we say the nature of a human being, we only understand here the subjective ground, wherever it may lie, of the exercise of the human being's freedom in general, under objective moral laws antecedent to every deed that falls within the scope of the senses. And I continue, but this subjective ground must in turn itself always be a deed of freedom, for otherwise the use or abuse of the human being's power of choice with respect to the moral law could not be imputed to him, nor could the good or evil in him be called moral. Underline please here with me, hence the ground of evil cannot lie in any object determining the power of choice through inclination, nor in any natural impulses, but only in a rule, hence the maxim, rule of action, but only in a rule that the power of choice itself produces for the exercise of its freedom. That is to say, this is what I said, in a maxim. Okay. So it's precisely what I said. Of course, we cannot base evil on simple inclination that is in us towards something. You cannot base evil because you have an inclination to, steal certain things from people. This is not what really determines this, because you could have the inclination also, but not act upon it. You have to have a maxim, a rule of action that can be good or evil. If you have a rule of action that says you must steal, you can steal to get what you want. You can use people, as we said, as means to your own ends. Then this is what is the determining factor of evil in you. So it's an evil maxim, in other words, that makes someone evil, and not any inclination that you may have. Okay. I jump on page 131 to the next paragraph. Kant says, we shall say, therefore, of one of these two characters which distinguish the human being from other possible rational beings, that it is innate, so it's rooted in us. Look at the title of the reading concerning the indwelling, the innate presence of evil principle alongside the good, or the radical evil in human nature, innate. I reread then, it is innate in him. And yet, so we shall always be satisfied that nature is not to blame for it if the character of a person is evil, nor does it deserve praise if the character of a person is good, but that the human being is alone its author. But since the first ground of adoption of our maxims, which must itself again lie in the free power of choice, cannot be any fact possibly given in experience, the good or the evil in the human being is said to be innate, as the subjective ground of the adoption of this or that maxim with respect to the moral law. Only in the sense that it is posited as the ground antecedent to every use of freedom given in experience, from the earliest youth as far back as birth, and is thus represented as present in the human being at the moment of birth, not that birth itself is its cause. Okay. So we have in us, and it's not from experience then, the possibility, if you like, Kant is telling us, to follow a maxim that is good, and we have the possibility in us to follow a maxim that is evil. And this, again, independent of experience. So we cannot say that we get it from experience. We cannot say that we are born without it, and then little by little we acquire such maxims that determine our freedom to act justly or unjustly, to act morally or immorally, to act as good or as evil. It is not from experience, it is something then that is in us. It's a possibility in all human beings. And this is what Kant means then, he tells us, when he speaks of it as innate, as in us from birth. Okay? It doesn't mean that because we are born, we have it. No, but this moment, these possibilities for these maxims to make us follow one or the other, the good or the evil, is in us from the time we are born as rational beings, because we are rational beings. Okay. So we reach, of course, this very pure, simple conclusion. Just retain this mostly really for our purposes. We have in the human being that we are, which means we are rational. So we as rational beings have two principles rooted in us. The evil principle and the good principle. Both are radical in us. Both are present in us a priori. And we can follow one or the other. We can let our maxim follow the moral law given to us by reason, or we can say our maxim will not follow the moral law given to us by reason, the categorical imperative we talked about. Okay, so how do we become good then? Again, notice this is all reason. This is all reason. We are morally good or morally evil based on whether we follow the moral law and the categorical imperative that comes from it. The maxim of our action follows the moral law, then we are good. Okay? From reason comes the moral law. Now, next, part 2, page 132 in your reader, of course, concerning the battle of the good against the evil principle for dominion over the human being. Kant tells us to become a morally good human being, it is not enough simply to let the germ of the good which lies in our species develop unhindered. In other words, this is what Kant, where Kant is attacking someone like Rousseau. But let's read and talk afterwards. So to become a morally good human being is not simply enough, or isn't enough simply to let the germ of the good which lies in our species develop unhindered. There is in us an active and opposing cause of evil, which is also to be combated. It was especially the Stoics who, among the ancient moralists, called attention to this through their watchword virtue, which designates courage and valor in Greek as well as in Latin, and hence presupposes the presence of an enemy. In this respect, the name virtue is a glorious one, and the fact that people have often boastfully misused and derided it can do it no harm. Okay? So, because this actually can be logical conclusion for what we said in the first part, there is in us two principles. They are both then active. One is good, one is evil. And so Kant says it is not enough to do, if you read the Emile of Rousseau, to just let our good nature, if you like, develop unhindered. It means without obstacles to obtain a good person. Rousseau, of course, wants our education in his Emile to be natural, to let the child from childhood till he grows up, becomes an adolescent and so on, develop in a natural way. As long as you follow the call of nature, as long as you follow your innate voice of conscience, is what Rousseau calls it in his text from the Emile, very famous text called The Creed of the Savoyard Priest, which says there is in us conscience. We don't need anything from organized religions. We have the call of nature in us, the voice of nature in us, which is an innate feeling of what is good, that tells us what is good. If we let this develop, we are a good person. Kant says, no, it is not enough to do that. He's really answering Rousseau here, in a way, very clearly. Because there is in us not only a good principle, we are not just by nature good, as Rousseau says, we also have an evil principle. So he's adding this. Okay? So he's not like Hobbes nor Rousseau. He says we have two principles in us, a principle that is good, one that is evil. If I compare him to Hobbes and Rousseau, which you don't need to absolutely do yourselves, but can help here. Hobbes believed that there is one principle in the state of nature, the principle of preservation. So it means, and that's it, and it means that the humans, all they want to do is preserve themselves at any cost. So you're ready to kill others, you're ready, etc., etc., and we end up in a world in the state of nature where everybody is fighting everybody, so perpetual war, and then we get out of this war, etc., by coming together under a contract and giving all power to a ruler, a sovereign over us. Anyways, so there is one principle for Hobbes, it's the principle of preservation. Rousseau adds principle of preservation, and he adds one principle of pity, and for him they are both good, because it is good to want to preserve yourself, so, and it's good to have sympathy for other people. So in us, nature made us good, right? So Kant says, he adds to, he is not like, so he's contradicting Hobbes and he's contradicting Rousseau. He says, no, we cannot say we are naturally good or naturally evil. We have in us, because if I go back again, Hobbes says man is naturally evil in the end, and Rousseau, man is naturally good. Kant says, no, we cannot speak like this. We have in us a good principle, the principle of good and the principle of evil, right? And so it's not like Rousseau and it's not like Hobbes. So he says it's not enough to just let the good develop unhindered, because there is two powers. There is a power of evil there also operating in us. If I read again the second line at the end, there is in us an active an opposing cause of evil, which is also to be combated. And he refers to the Stoics of ancient times, الرواقيون بالعربي, because the Stoics always presented indeed the fact of being virtuous, the fact of being then a moral person, as something that needs strength, something that needs courage and valor. So you have, it's a question of combat. There is a drama, if you like, in you. There is a drama, a fight between the good and evil that you will keep all your life, because the evil principle is radically present there just as much as the good one. So there is always a fight. There is, please learn this by heart, there is an enemy within. Okay? Learn this by heart. We have an enemy in us that we are fighting. It's the evil. Okay? In the human, there is an enemy that is evil, and so we are always fighting it if we want to be moral beings. Okay? Now, I continue. Where did the Stoics, however, make a mistake? Kant says in the next paragraph, however, those valiant men, the Stoics, mistook their enemy. They thought it was in our inclinations, who is not to be sought in the natural inclinations, which merely lack discipline and openly display themselves unconcealed to everyone's consciousness, but is rather, where is that enemy? It's rather, as it were, an invisible enemy, one who hides behind reason and hence is all the more dangerous. Okay? They send forth wisdom against folly, which lets itself be deceived by inclinations merely because of carelessness, instead of summoning it against the malice, the radical evil of the human heart, which secretly undermines the disposition with soul-corrupting principles. Okay? So he's saying the Stoics, however, I agree with them that we need courage to fight, to battle the evil, but he says, be careful, the evil is not in our natural inclinations, which we saw previously. Kant says it's not a question of our inclinations, it's a question of a principle that lets us follow certain bad inclinations. So the enemy is, as it were, is in a way invisible. It's not something you can indicate with your finger, something you can really pinpoint to an experience, etc., etc. It is something that is so insidious. It hides. It does things مثل الثعلب, right? It does things in a sly way. It hides behind reason, right? This is where something like the principle I told you about is evil, act in such a way that you use humanity and others as a means to an end. This is evil. You can then use reason in a bad way, if you like. And so pretend to be following something reasonable when in fact you are not. You are instrumentalizing reason. You are using reason as an instrument instead of following the moral law of reason. When do you use reason as an instrument? You use it as an instrument when you want to reach an end and you cleverly use others to get to that end. If I want to become, let's suppose, a doctor at Balamat, and this is my end, and everything justifies what I do towards it, and I use my intelligence, my reason, to get what I want. So I cheat on the exam. I go to the best students and take their notes, and not help them. I lie to those students if they ask me about my notes from class. I give them bad notes, so they fail and I don't, and I get a place if there is a kind of competitive exam, etc. It hides behind my reason, such evil principle. And it can be then what uses my intelligence for bad purposes. Malice, right? Malice. So here again, Kant is going against Rousseau, because Rousseau says when you listen to your heart, okay, you are always good. The voice, if you like, the innate voice of our heart is the innate voice of conscience, and it's always good. Okay? Kant is saying no, be careful, because you can also have an evil principle in your heart, right? He very clearly said there is the malice of the human heart, not only something good in the human heart. Okay. This is, in fact, all you need from this. I'm not going to go further. So, finally then, for Kant, there is an evil principle. The enemy that we must combat then, the enemy that wants us to be immoral, not to follow the moral law, is within. We have an evil principle within, so it's radical. Don't forget the word radical comes from root. Shilsh, okay. The radix is in us. In Latin, the famous saying from the Bible, radix malorum est cupiditas. Cupidity is the root of all evil. Anyways, there is in us then a root of evil, and again, it is something that reason must combat. We must follow the moral law given to us by reason. Okay? If we follow this moral law, we are moral persons. So irregardless, of course, of any positive religion. It means any religion that is posited, made by the humans. We are done with Kant. We are done with our semester. And I'm glad to have been able to share these ideas with you, and I remind you that Your test will be on the 15th of this month of May at 11. The test will last 1 hour and 15 minutes. The decision of the department is to do it by Moodle, the normal Moodle, not OBS, not etc. The normal Moodle as an assignment. It will be sent to you at the time, so at 11, at the decided time, and you'll have 1 hour and 15 minutes. If there's any change in that, I will tell you. Now, from now till then, till Friday and then till Monday, please, if you have questions, please do have questions as you review, and send them on WhatsApp, and I will be answering these questions. Okay. Meanwhile, stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon.